You have already been programmed, not by a cult leader in a compound somewhere, not by a guru whispering in a dark room. You were programmed by everything you have ever believed about yourself. Your name, your values, your sense of right and wrong. Someone installed those, and you never questioned it. Today, we are going to dissect exactly how cults reprogram human identity, but here is the part that will disturb you. Same techniques, different degree. The methods cults use are not alien or exotic. They are the exact same psychological mechanisms used by advertising agencies, political campaigns, educational institutions, and even your own family. The only difference is intensity. As Robert Lifton warned after studying thought reform, the line between education and indoctrination is often a matter of degree, not kind. By the end of this video, you will not just understand how cults work. You will recognize these patterns operating in your own life right now. And that recognition might be the most uncomfortable thing you experience today. Before we talk about cults, we need to understand something fundamental about identity itself. Most people believe their identity is fixed, that who they are was determined at birth, set in stone like a serial number on a machine. But psychology tells a radically different story. Software. Your identity is software, not hardware. It was written by your environment, your parents, your culture, your early experiences. Erik Erikson, one of the most influential developmental psychologists, demonstrated that identity is constructed through a series of psychosocial stages. Each stage is a negotiation between you and your environment. You did not choose who you became. You were shaped by forces you never consented to. Think about it. You did not choose your native language. You did not choose your first religion or lack thereof. You did not choose your initial political leanings. These were all installed. And that installation process used repetition, emotional bonding, social reinforcement, and authority figures. The exact same tools a cult uses. The only difference: timing and intensity. Cults just compress the process. They take what normally happens over 18 years of childhood and accelerate it into weeks or months. But this raises a terrifying question that most people are not ready to face. The first phase of cult reprogramming is not what you would expect. There is no brainwashing chamber, no electrodes, no torture. It starts with overwhelming love. They call it love bombing. And it works because it exploits one of the deepest human needs, the need to belong. When someone first encounters a cult, they are showered with attention, praise, affirmation, and a sense of instant community. Robert Cialdini's research on influence identified this as the reciprocity principle. When someone gives you something, you feel psychologically compelled to give back. People will do anything for those who encourage their dreams, justify their failures, and confirm their suspicions. But here is where it gets dark. This is not exclusive to cults. Think about how brands create loyalty programs, how political movements make you feel like you are part of something bigger, how social media platforms give you instant validation through likes and followers. Love becomes a chain. The emotional high of being unconditionally accepted is so powerful that it overrides critical thinking. If this psychological mechanism is resonating with you right now, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. There is so much more to uncover, because love bombing is just the doorway. What comes next is where the real reprogramming begins. Once the emotional bond is established, the second phase begins. And this is where most people misunderstand what cults actually do. They do not add a new identity on top of the old one. Demolition. They systematically demolish your existing identity first. This process has a clinical name: identity destabilization, and it follows a precise pattern. First, they isolate you from your previous support network, family, friends, anyone who reinforces your old sense of self. Then they attack your existing beliefs, not with logic, but with emotional pressure. Shame, guilt, doubt, fear. These four weapons are deployed relentlessly. They convince you that your previous life was a lie, that your family did not truly love you, that your education was propaganda, that your friends were holding you back. Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance explains why this works. When people are confronted with information that contradicts their beliefs, and they are in an emotionally vulnerable state, they do not reject the new information. They reject their old beliefs to eliminate the psychological discomfort. Sound extreme? Consider this. Every political revolution in history used the same technique. Every effective advertising campaign tells you that your current life is inadequate before offering a solution. The first step in liquidating a people is to erase its memory. The demolition of self is not a cult invention. It is a human technology, and once the old self is gone, the reconstruction begins. Here is something most people never consider. Language does not just describe reality. Language constructs reality. And cults know this better than anyone. Every major cult develops its own vocabulary. Scientology has auditing, clearing, engrams, and suppressives. Heaven's Gate called themselves the next level. The Enzivum cult rebranded slavery as being a collateral member. This is not random. George Orwell described this perfectly in 1984 with the concept of newspeak. If you control the language people use, you control the thoughts they can think. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. When a cult gives you new words, they are literally giving you new categories for understanding reality. Old concepts become impossible to think about because the words no longer exist. New concepts become the only framework available. New words create new thoughts, and new thoughts create a new identity. But ask yourself this: does your political party have its own special vocabulary? Does your company use insider jargon that outsiders would not understand? Does your social group have phrases that mark who belongs and who does not? Corporate speak political jargon. The mechanism is identical. The degree is what differs. And this leads us to something even more disturbing about how the new identity is cemented into place. Once the new language is installed, something fascinating happens. The cult introduces rituals, and this is where psychology and neuroscience intersect in a terrifying way. Repetitive group rituals, chanting, singing, synchronized movement, meditation, trigger what anthropologist Victor Turner called communitas, a state of intense social bonding where individual identity dissolves into group identity. The self disappears, and the group becomes the only self that matters. Neuroscience has confirmed this. When people engage in synchronized activities, their brain waves literally synchronize. Mirror neurons fire in patterns that blur the boundary between self and other. The individual ego weakens, the group ego strengthens. But before you dismiss this as something only weak people fall for, consider your own life. Have you ever felt a surge of identity at a sports game, chanting with thousands of strangers? Have you ever felt more yourself during a church service or meditation retreat? Sports rallies, worship concerts. All of these use the same neurological mechanism. Rhythmic repetition plus social synchrony equals identity transformation. The cult just dials it to 11, as Emil Durkheim described it. In the midst of an assembly animated by a common passion, we become susceptible to acts and sentiments of which we are incapable when reduced to our own forces. And this shared ecstasy creates something even more powerful, which brings us to the next chapter. Every cult creates a sharp dividing line between the group and the outside world. Division. And this is perhaps the most universal human psychological tool ever weaponized. Henry Tajfel's minimal group paradigm experiments proved something shocking in the 1970s. You do not need any real difference between groups to create hostility. Just the perception of belonging to different groups is enough to trigger discrimination, bias, and dehumanization. Humans will create enemies out of nothing just to strengthen their own group identity. Cults exploit this by constructing an elaborate narrative about the outside world. Outsiders are lost, asleep, corrupted, or dangerous. Only the group possesses truth. Only the group offers safety. Lost, asleep, corrupted, dangerous. This creates what psychologists call an in-group, out-group bias so extreme that members literally cannot process information that contradicts the group narrative. Their brains filter it out before it reaches conscious awareness. Now consider something uncomfortable. Every political party does this. Every religion does this. Every nation does this. The language of us versus them is not a cult invention. It is perhaps the oldest psychological technology humanity possesses. As the great psychologist Gordon Allport observed, the human mind must think with the aid of categories. Once formed, categories are the basis for normal prejudgment. We categorize to survive. Cults just hijack that survival mechanism. But the deepest level of programming goes even further than group belonging. Robert Lifton identified 8 criteria of thought reform after studying prisoners of war and cult members for decades. But there is one criterion that sits at the heart of every successful identity reprogramming. He called it sacred science. The belief that the group possesses an absolute truth, that cannot be questioned. This is the keystone. When a belief system is elevated to the status of sacred and scientific simultaneously, it becomes psychologically impossible to challenge. Because if it is sacred, questioning is blasphemy, and if it is scientific, questioning is ignorance. 1. Sacred means you must not question it. 2. Scientific means you cannot question it. 3. Combined, they create total thought control. The genius of this technique is that it traps the mind from both directions. Your emotional loyalty says do not question. Your intellectual framework says there is nothing to question. Sacred plus science equals prison. But again, look at the world around you. How many beliefs do you hold that feel both morally righteous and factually obvious? How many of your convictions have you never examined because they seem too self-evident to question? The most dangerous ideas are not the ones we argue about, but the ones we take for granted. Your unexamined certainties may be the strongest chains you wear. And speaking of chains, what happens when someone tries to escape them? The answer might be the most disturbing part of this entire video. The most effective prisons are not made of walls, they are made of fear. And the fear of leaving is the final lock on identity reprogramming. Every cult installs what psychologists call a phobia indoctrination. A deep, irrational terror of what happens if you leave. The outside world is depicted as dangerous, meaningless, or spiritually fatal. Former members are portrayed as broken, lost, or damned. Leaving equals death, psychological, social, or literal. Stephen Hassan, a former cult member turned psychologist, developed the BITE model to describe how this control operates. Behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. All four converge at the exit point. The cult does not need to lock the door when it has convinced you that outside is worse than inside. But what makes this truly universal is that you have experienced a version of this in your own life. Have you ever stayed in a toxic relationship because the fear of being alone was worse than the pain of staying? Have you ever kept a job you hated because the uncertainty of change terrified you? People prefer a certain misery to an uncertain joy. Known pain versus unknown freedom. The cult did not invent this fear. It simply perfected the delivery system. But there is one more layer of programming that makes all of this possible, and without it, none of what I have described would work. There's a reason every cult on Earth uses confession, and it is not for the purpose you think. On the surface, confession appears to be about honesty, growth, and spiritual cleansing, but beneath that surface lies one of the most sophisticated psychological control mechanisms ever devised. Leverage. When you confess your deepest fears, your secret shames, your private doubts, you are handing someone else the keys to your psyche. Lifton called this the demand for purity combined with the cult of confession. Vulnerability shared under pressure becomes ammunition for control. In a cult context, your confessions are stored, remembered, and strategically used. Feeling doubts, they remind you of the shame you confessed. Thinking of leaving, they threaten to expose what you revealed. Questioning the leader, they reframe your questions as evidence of the impurity you already admitted to. Shame secrets control power. But now consider the secular parallels. Social media encourages radical self-disclosure. Therapy culture normalizes public vulnerability. Corporations create safe spaces where employees share personal struggles that later appear in performance reviews. The information economy runs on your confessions. As Mitchell Foucault observed, the obligation to confess is now relayed through so many different points that we no longer perceive it as the effect of a power that constrains us. We confess willingly now, and that makes us more controllable than ever. But here is the question that ties everything together. So here is the question this entire video has been building toward. If cults use love bombing, and so do brands, if cults destroy the old identity, and so do political revolutions, if cults control language, and so do corporations and governments, if cults use ritual synchrony, and so do sports, religion, and concerts, if cults divide the world into us and them, and so does every ideology you have ever encountered, then where exactly do you draw the line between influence and indoctrination? The answer, and this is what makes it so uncomfortable, is that the line is not where you think it is. The techniques are identical, the psychology is identical, the neurological mechanisms are identical, the only variable is degree. You have been programmed your entire life. The question is not whether you have been influenced. You have. Every human being on Earth has been. The question is whether you are aware of it, and awareness, true awareness, is the only thing that separates a programmed mind from a free one. As Carl Jung said with devastating clarity, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Awareness is the antidote. So examine your beliefs, question your certainties. Notice when you feel the pull of the group, the comfort of the language, the warmth of belonging. These are not bad things, but they are powerful things, and powerful things deserve your conscious attention. If you made it this far, comment deprogrammed if you are ready to examine your own programming. The most dangerous prison is the one you do not know you are in. Welcome to the Psyche Project.